The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Every civilization carries the seeds of its own destruction, and the same cycle shows in them all. The Republic is born, flourishes, decays into plutocracy, and is captured by the shoemaker whom the mercenaries and the militaries make into a king. The people invent their oppressors, and the oppressors serve the function for which they are invented. A quote from Mark Twain, something to remember and consider. The train of industrialized, militarized civilization is completely off the rails. Immense challenges are already unfolding and will accelerate rapidly. The storm's not coming. It's not on the horizon. Rather, it's upon us. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly edition of the Global Alert News Hour for GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio. The weekly Global Alert News Hour is completely commercial-free, brought to you by GeoEngineeringWatch.org. As I must always state, these are unpleasant truths that are essential to know if we're to have any chance of avoiding near-term extinction. This is not conjecture, it's a mathematical fact. This program is broadcast throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. Global Alert News is also broadcast on the East Coast by the PRN Radio Network at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. My thanks to Gary Knoll for all he has done for the common good and for rebroadcasting this show, as other networks are now doing as well. I've been asked this when I say I'm running out of time in this broadcast, which I am. For YouTube listeners that don't realize this is a live Northern California and elsewhere broadcast, I have a specific time slot to work within. And it makes this job difficult because I can't cover everything I need to cover. So for those that don't realize who are watching the YouTube repost of this broadcast, that's why I'm limited to a specific amount of time on this broadcast. I do my best within that amount of time. For those in Redding, Northern California, as I always state this reminder, there are free materials at Orchard Nutrition. If you care about what's unfolding, and you certainly should care because our futures are at stake in a very immediate sense, there are free materials at Orchard Nutrition that cover the critical climate engineering issue, the lethal criminal vaccination dangers that we face, and the 9/11 issue, which is the epitome for, quote, human patriotic catalyzing events, when in reality, if the real data is examined, the official narrative is clearly, patently false. A pack of lies. We have 3,000 architects and engineers now, 3,000 from all over the globe, top professionals in their field, telling us officially on the record the 9/11 narrative is completely false. Know more about that event if you claim to care about your country. Jim Fair, a staunch supporter, the Jim Fair events, GEMFAIRE. Look that up online. Go to their homepage. If you're near any of their events this weekend in Costa Mesa, California, at the Orange County Fair and Event Center, GeoEngineering Watch full informational booth will be there with free materials. If you're in the Southern California area, visit Jim Fair, get free materials. Help us to sound the alarm on the critical climate engineering issue. Again, look at the Jim Fair site, GEMFAIR. Strong ally of not just GeoEngineeringWatch.org, but the greater good. And my sincere gratitude to the Jim Fair event staff and organizers. The Jim Fair event that was scheduled for Santa Rosa for next weekend will likely not happen. We're not sure yet. Check the Jim Fair site and find out, but certainly with the cataclysm unfolding there, that event is in great question at this point. There's critical breaking stories I'll try to cover in this broadcast, many, and I try to fit in as many as I can of the most dire issues. But first, this must be said, with each passing week, more and more factless, unsubstantiated, and completely discrediting claims are being made about many of the dire events that are unfolding around us all. And this needs to be said and considered. We must all investigate the facts before coming to conclusions. Solid and verifiable data, of course, helps to expose critical issues and the causes behind them. If we're to be successful with essential efforts like fully exposing and halting the climate engineering weather warfare assault, Credibility is crucial. Investigate the facts before sharing completely unsubstantiated and implausible claims. Again, investigate before blindly sharing, not after. Moving on, I just went to Sacramento, the capital, to distribute materials throughout the entire Capitol building. Every senator, every representative, every committee. GeoEngineering Watch informational flyers and booklets and DVDs. This is to help provide essential information to people that are not given it from any other source. I had my daughter help me to carry those materials. This is about my 6th trip to the Capitol to do exactly this, to keep this in their lap so that they understand these unfolding cataclysms, like the firestorms, can be directly connected to the cataclysmic effects of climate engineering, covert climate engineering that our government and others have been engaged in for some 70 years. Very politically connected individual right now also, in addition to our efforts at the Capitol, is in Washington, D.C., lobbying with legislators, meeting with them personally all last week to bring the geoengineering issue to their attention. GeoEngineeringWatch.org has supplied this individual with our newest flyers, our new 20-page fact and photo summary booklets, extremely effective tools to raise awareness, and our commercial DVDs for passing on to senators, representatives in Washington. The same individual will also be at an event next week where she will have the opportunity to meet President Trump and perhaps be able to pass on our informational materials to his aides. Though again, as I've long since made known, Trump's top campaign staff and Carson's were at a meeting in January of 2015 that was specifically for addressing the geoengineering issue. As I've, again, previously stated, this meeting was held at the home of a former U.S. Air Force Major General. GeoEngineeringWatch.org informational materials were passed on to the Trump and Carson people at that meeting. They certainly know from that point on. They likely knew before that, but they've known, has geoengineering been slowed down? No, it's being ramped up radically. These people know at the top, but by passing out this data, especially at the highest levels in Washington, and I've been told by the same Air Force general that our booklets have been passed on by him to people at the highest levels, people who certainly already know climate engineering is going on. But they've been told one side of that equation, that these programs are necessary and somehow for the greater good, which couldn't be further from the truth. And we're trying to open their eyes to that fact in every way we can. The legal action just filed also, for those who don't know, go to GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the top stories and recent sections. GeoEngineeringWatch.org and the Legal Alliance to Stop Geoengineering and Minnesota Health Coalition, also working with us, has filed against the Department of Commerce, who's the umbrella agency for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who is not giving us the information that they are legally required to give us under the Freedom of Information Act. So that lawsuit, if you haven't seen or read that, go to GeoEngineeringWatch.org, posted 2 days ago. Moving on to headlines. What has mainstream media been feeding the masses? First, on the subject of mainstream media, I want to cover this. How many notice that every other commercial is an allergy medication or pharmaceutical of some sort? And how many notice that the skies in almost every single mainstream media commercial are gray and dingy, often with background skies full of visible geoengineering sprayed trails, or at least aerosol-filled skies if the trails themselves are not visible, often with half-foliated dying trees in the background. That's the world we live in. Just take the latest, most powerful pharmaceutical allergy medications and don't look up so that you don't have to think about what you're inhaling with every single breath. About headlines, a few side notes here. Football game flag salutes. Those that were distracted by the Vice President Pence theater leaving the football game should pay attention to the wider horizon. Our planet's life support systems are disintegrating by the day. And for those who side with Pence in the programmed false conclusion that refusing to salute the flag is politicizing football, let's be clear. Making it mandatory to salute the flag in the first place is making the game political. And for the record, the U.S. military spent $52 million last year on recruiting ads in sports events. How exactly is that not making the game political? About Geostorm, the movie, another side note, footnote here. I've been asked this question: is Geostorm the movie, which comes out in a week, is that the entertainment industry's attempt to expose the climate engineering reality, or is the movie an attempt to sci-fi the subject and thus hide the climate engineering reality by marginalizing it? The latter reason would seem the most likely. This being said, some activists are already planning on trying to distribute GeoEngineeringWatch.org informational flyers to moviegoers. About the tragic massacre in Las Vegas, the official narrative continues to unravel. Let's hope the full truth, whatever that is completely exposed soon. Because the official narrative on all these events is wrong. There are too many holes in that narrative, like 9/11. How glaring a lie could that event be? That buildings just fall down. That never in the history of high-rise buildings ever, no matter how long they burned, down to a frame, they've never fallen down, not once. And that day 3 fell down at free fall speed. In the case of Building 7, that never got hit by anything, with 2 floors burning, some furniture burning. How absurd is that? What rational person could believe the official 9/11 narrative? And the same is true in Vegas. Too many holes in that story. All of us have a responsibility to continue investigating these issues and disclosing those facts to those around us. Moving on, Hurricane Nate summary. As I stated in last week's broadcast, before Hurricane Nate made landfall, the climate engineers have the ability to make or break any storm with patented processes of cyclone manipulation that have been going on for 70 years, though I've disclosed again and again. Though the agenda of the climate engineers can't be known to us, in the case of Hurricane Nate, its circulation and convection was greatly diminished as Nate was coming on shore. Gulf states felt that they had, to some degree, quote, dodged a bullet. In reality, they were, to some degree, spared by the climate engineers in this case. But if we look deeper, were they really spared? Cyclones like Nate are weakened by jet aircraft spraying of highly toxic aerosols over the storm. This weakens the convection. These are patented processes, as I've stated. Extremely powerful radio frequency microwave transmissions also assist in the weakening of the storm. These transmissions manipulate the electrically conductive sprayed particulates and thus manipulate the storm. All of the climate engineering processes are toxic and damaging to the environment, contaminating every breath we take. So were they really spared? I think not. How is the weather? The climate engineering assault continues to tear the planet's life support systems apart. As I cover every week, it gets worse every week, while contaminating the entire planet, and again, every breath we take. Record heat and freak cool downs and snow, a direct result of geoengineering and patented chemical ice nucleation processes, are occurring at the same time in regions that are not that far apart. The weather whiplash scenarios will continue to worsen. So we have firestorms on the West Coast, record heat on the East Coast, and we have snow falling in places like Montana as it's fluctuating between 75 degrees and snow, with record heat on either side of the country. So we need to understand there's nothing natural about our weather, nothing. About the firestorms wreaking havoc and death in California and elsewhere, the connection to climate engineering is factually verifiable. The connection is undeniable. For those who wish to actually investigate, check for this headline on the homepage of GeoEngineeringWatch.org. The headline is this: Geoengineering is fueling firestorm catastrophes. 10-minute short video filled with building block facts. What will it take to wake the masses to what's being done to them? And about waking the masses, activists in the heart of the firestorm zone have been supplied with GeoEngineeringWatch.org informational materials to distribute, to help wake those victims of what amounts to weather warfare. More recent headlines on biosphere implosion I'll cover in a few minutes, but first, I want to go through some harsh realities on the military-industrial complex juggernaut of insanity that's further fueling the biosphere implosion on every front. Let's remember the U.S. military, largest single consumer of fossil fuels and the biggest single polluter on the planet, and that's not taking things like climate engineering into account or all the other forms of destruction that we know are being inflicted with no disclosure. And I'm not saying it's only our military. Every military is guilty. We know Russia has dumped an unimaginable amount of toxic nuclear waste in the Arctic, but so has the U.S. In fact, in regard to ocean dumps of nuclear or radioactive material, the U.S. is at the top of the list. and using still now off the U.S. West Coast, U.S. military using depleted uranium, toxic radioactive ammunition for practice off the whole North American West Coast, on top of Fukushima, on top of the superheating dying oceans to begin with. Is it a wonder everything's washing up on the beach dead? Should be no wonder. In regards to the military-industrial complex and the endless wars for achieving peace, and how does that exactly go together, Trump's cavalier attitude toward the increasingly likely World War III scenario that's unfolding is exactly what the military-industrial complex wants. Exactly what they want. Trump is a puppet in this play, as was Obama, as was Clinton, as were the Bushes, puppets in the play, trying to divide and confuse the population, make them take sides, polarize them, so that they are not looking at the wider picture. That's exactly what's happening. U.S. bombings in Syria killed yet more civilians. No surprise, our media simply doesn't cover it. If you're a truly patriotic American, don't you have a responsibility to find out what's being done in your name? Or is it easier just to wave your flag and pretend it isn't so? This is the sort of American freedom and democracy mantra, false mantra, that was spread in the name of the Vietnam War. And now we don't have those types of protests anymore, do we? Because corporations own the universities. They own them. Those in power wanted to make sure that that type of protesting never happened again, and they effectively killed it. If you want to know the truth from the frontline people that were forced to face what our country did under the false narrative of freedom and democracy in Vietnam, watch this film, Winter Soldier. Search Vietnam War Winter Soldier documentary and hear what those soldiers had to say about what they were forced to endure, what they were made to do by our government in Vietnam. It's difficult to even listen to what they had to share. Very difficult. Would any truly patriotic American refuse to turn off the football game and actually listen to what their brothers and sisters, sons and daughters had to do in Vietnam? But how many truly patriotic people do we have, or do we have false patriots, as Mr. Twain would describe? That's what our country is filled with at this point. If you're truly patriotic, search Vietnam War Winter Soldier documentary and learn what you didn't want to know. The power structure is an increasingly dysfunctional tribe of psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, megalomaniacs, and many other forms of mentally insane individuals. Here's a headline. Inside America's militarized mind, how propaganda and perpetual war have poisoned our imaginations. Be a good soldier and give in to the military-industrial complex. That's the narrative we're taught. Top military recruitment lies. Another headline. This is a book that reveals the dirty truth about the military recruitment complex. Propaganda of U.S. military through our schools. From this report, the U.S. military has turned itself into the greatest tool of the U.S. weapons industry, the largest and most lucrative business enterprise in the world. In order for this business to remain successful, there must be struggles and wars continuously waged with no end in sight. It's hand-picked politicians in the U.S. government. While they speak of peace, they promote war. While they speak of love and respect, they promote hatred and disrespect. Moreover, these political tools of the U.S. weapons industry, while they speak of the sanctity of life before birth, they literally reveal no respect for life at all after birth. While they speak of the rights of Americans that Americans have for a good healthcare system and good education for all Americans, they take money away from these two vital elements to pass them to the manufacture and sales of more and more and more weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. military is behaving in the most immoral manner imaginable in regard to their exploitation of the poor and the downtrodden youth of this country. Public schools are being used as a tool for military recruitment for kids that feel they have no other choice. The propaganda these kids are fed by the U.S. military is sickening. And I ask everybody to not believe me. Please don't believe me. Rather, do some real research and find out for yourself just how bad it is. It should be a requirement for anyone considering signing up for the U.S. military. It should be a requirement to watch the film Born on the 4th of July. Because that film accurately portrays what one individual went through and how difficult it was for him to wake up to that, even after going through what he went through, because the programming is so severe. It's hard to break our programming. There must be a most core level motivation to break our programming, but it must be done for all of us. If we remain on this course, we're not going to be around long, and that's a mathematical fact. Sadly, so many Americans, again, just want to keep waving their flags and pretending it isn't so. Another headline, Russia military accuses U.S. of supporting ISIS. No secret. I've been over that again. This headline's from last week, but I've been over that again and again and again. Who has spawned, funded, and fueled ISIS? Back to what I just stated a few moments ago. The need for the military-industrial complex to have endless wars in the name of trying to produce peace. A complete paradox. That's what we have, and the American public buying into it, because sadly most don't yet want the truth. Let's hope that changes soon. From this report, 2 weeks after Russia released a set of satellite photos from Syria, which showed U.S. Special Forces ops located in an immediate proximity to ISIS positions, the Russian Defense Ministry stated on Wednesday and accused the United States of supporting Islamic State jihadists, enabling them to mount counter-offensive attacks in eastern Syria. This is a quote from a Russian military spokesman. The main thing preventing the final defeat of ISIS in Syria is not the terrorists' military capability, but the support and pandering to them by American colleagues. Our news doesn't cover that. How did ISIS get from Iraq to Syria? The U.S. allowed them a safe corridor to escape and fight again in Syria. Anyone who investigates this will not like what they find. And yet we have a population in America that doesn't want to investigate, doesn't want to look up and see what their own government is doing to them. Let's continue on this theme. A headline from the website defense1.com. Here's the headline. The U.S. will be dropping a lot more bombs on Afghanistan. From this report, 16 years into America's war in Afghanistan. Remember the war that was going to be over in a month? Remember that? That doesn't fit into the military-industrial complex plan. They simply want to get their foot in the door and never close it again in country after country after country. 16 years. And what's it about? Opium. Opiates sold now in our country. The opium production gone off the scale after the U.S. invades. Minerals. Remember the story I covered last week? Mr. Trump and Michael Silver from the American Elements Corporation now planning on exploding $1 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan. That's what it's about. And if you're in the military, understand that you're nothing more than a mercenary at this point. And I salute your motive, but the motive is not enough. It's not enough. Watch the film Born on the 4th of July if you haven't yet. You have to do the right thing if you take your oath to this country seriously. Do the right thing. Stop participating in this insanity. Continuing from the report, 16 years into America's war in Afghanistan, the Pentagon has a new strategy. It says it will help bring the conflict to an end. A large part of it intensifying, or their large part of their plan intensifying the U.S. and NATO-led bombing campaign in order to drive the Taliban into the negotiating table. Circular war. That's all this is. Creating the problem and then pretending to be a part of the solution. That's what our military does. That's what the weapons industry does, because that's good for business. Continuing from the report further still, the Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said the U.S. wants to embolden the Afghan forces by providing close air support and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets. That will make them more effective. How many lies have we been told by our military-industrial complex? And can anybody look at Mattis and tell me he's not exactly what he's labeled as, Mad Dog Mattis, or whatever his nickname is? These are the people that we are allowing to run our country and decimate the planet. It can't continue. Final paragraph from this report. An intensified air war is one of the new tactical aspects of a broader strategy that Madison, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, debuted at a pair of congressional hearings with the Senate and the House Armed Services Committee last week. The administration's new strategy is called R4+S, which stands for Regionalize, Realign, Reinforce, Reconcile, and Sustain. All these acronyms, these incredibly sick acronyms. I don't know what other word to put on it. It's like a big game for the military-industrial complex, and the American population just goes along with it. And what do we have? Trump wanting to pump up the military-industrial complex more. We heard how many headlines about that last week. He'd make it 10 times bigger if he could. Enough nuclear weapons on the planet right now to destroy life on Earth some 10 to 12,000 times over, and we need more? And we think these people are sane? A final sentence from this report, a statement from Mr. Madison, General Dunford. All told, that means more potential opportunities to drop bombs and more people embedded at the levels to identify such opportunities. Opportunities to drop bombs on other countries. And we wonder why those countries don't like us much anymore. We wonder why so many suicide bombers and terrorist attacks are aimed at us. It's the only way they have of fighting back. I'm not condoning that activity by any means. But I'm saying who's in whose country killing who? Everywhere. Our country is in somebody else's backyard bombing and destroying their country. What would we do? What would we do? So, how big is the connection to the new U.S. military bombing strategy and the information, again, that I covered last week, in which I reported that Trump has now been officially informed of Afghanistan's $1 trillion worth of minerals that are there for the taking? Again, Mr. Trump, like the Obamas, like the Clintons, like the Bushes, and the rest, are only playing their parts as puppets in the power structure play. So a reminder of the story from last week's broadcast. Michael Silver, again, the CEO for the American Elements Corporation, the world's largest metals and chemical supplier, a company that also supplies weather modification, geoengineering elements, toxic elements being sprayed on all of us, including aluminum and barium, nanoparticulates, recently, again, briefed Mr. Trump on the Afghan mineral wealth, and now, as I just covered, the U.S. plans on dropping, quote, a lot more bombs on Afghanistan. What better way to slaughter anyone in Afghanistan that dares to protest the U.S. intentions of looting, plundering, and pillaging their country? Just bomb them in the name of spreading freedom and democracy. And, oh yeah, exploiting $1 trillion worth of mineral resources. Here's one more example of the U.S. empire at work. This example from Niger, where several U.S. soldiers were just killed. Here's the headline. 4 American deaths highlight U.S. military role in Niger. Why are we in Niger? I'll get to that. Let me finish the sentence from this report. The deaths of 4 American Army Special Forces soldiers in an ambush in Niger on Wednesday in an attack highlights the little-known U.S. military presence in the West African nation. There are more than 800 U.S. military personnel in Niger. And how many countries are we in around the globe? 150 plus. Almost 1,000 military bases. That's empire. Anybody who denies that is simply not willing to face the truth. And the military is in Niger to, again, protect U.S. interests. And what does that translate to exactly? Plundering resources to keep the empire going. That's why. One more example, about 250 American military personnel are in Cameroon, conducting, quote, surveillance missions, similar to those in Niger. They can label this whatever they want. It's about protecting U.S. interests, expanding the U.S. empire, and acquiring resources to keep that empire going. Again, the U.S. military maintaining a network of nearly 800 U.S. military bases around the world. Since the U.S. and Israel are joined at the hip, one and the same, what is Israel up to that's not being reported by the U.S.? Whose backyard are they in? Whose land are they taking, just like we have taken in the U.S.? Israel is behaving in the same manner as the U.S., taking what it wants from whom it wants. And here's a headline to consider from last week. Israeli Prime Minister pledges new West Bank housing annexed to Israel. From that report, Israel's Prime Minister on Tuesday pledged to build thousands of new homes in one of the West Bank's biggest settlements and annexing it to Israel, taking that land from Palestine. And for those who blindly wave their flags and pretend Israel can do no wrong, that couldn't be further from the truth. And I'm not saying that other nations are not at fault, nations all over the world. But I'm saying, how do we take the splinter out of our neighbor's eye when we have a log in our own, as the scripture goes? How long can the completely out of control, industrialized, militarized civilization complex continue on the current course? Not long. Military aggression is directly related to resource depletion and biosphere implosion. That must be understood by so many Americans who want to pretend there's nothing wrong with the environment. What an incredibly willful blindness that is. So let's get to the biosphere headlines that are really the bottom line. Bottom line to economic implosion, bottom line to military aggression, and military-industrial complex desperation. So here's a headline. I want to go through some environmental frontline headlines from last week. This is from the New York Magazine. Here's the headline. This isn't the new normal for climate change. That will be worse. That's the headline. From this report, it's tempting to look at the string of disasters and think, climate change is here, end quote. But the truth is actually far scarier. Welcome to the new normal. Climate engineering is, of course, not mentioned. And for anybody who thinks that our government and other governments around the globe would sit around and ask us if they can engineer the climate, or that they wouldn't do it without our permission, you are living in an alternate reality. They are doing it. They have been doing it. It's right over your head. There's mountains of data to back this up. It's killing everything. It's destroying Earth's natural life support systems. If it doesn't stop, we're done. How simple is that? So, is the state of the climate, in fact, as bad as Al Gore said it was? No, it's not. Here's the truth. Based on all available frontline data, the state of the climate is not as bad as Al Gore warned. In fact, it's exponentially worse. Exponentially worse than anything Al Gore has stated. Think about that. And I stand by that. I've always stood by that. My narrative has never changed because it's based on frontline data. Gore is just another power structure hypocrite who's actually capitalizing off the same corporations he claims to be fighting. Gore's also actually playing his part in pacifying large segments of the population by pushing the false narrative that if we all buy some solar panels and an electric car, everything will turn out okay. That narrative is a lie. We are going to hit the wall. The question is how hard, and can we change the flavor of that by waking the population up and stopping the single greatest and most destructive human activity of all, climate engineering. Can we stop that? And that depends on us, doesn't it? What's the biggest liable omission for Mr. Gore and the whole of the so-called environmentalist community? The total omission of the planetarily decimating geoengineering programs. The single most environmentally destructive human activity on the planet. And Al Gore, of course, pretends it isn't happening. Every major environmental organization pretends it isn't happening. And in the meantime, an environmentalist as well, and I know many. And I can't express my angst and disappointment in their lack of courage, in their willingness to stay in a bubble and pretend that the planet isn't imploding and pretend that climate engineering isn't real. So-called environmentalists, and I am one. I'm an environmentalist to the core. I would gladly live in the most primitive of setting on a healthy planet. But we don't have that option so long as so many are not willing to face the truth. They're not willing. Even the so-called environmentalists. In fact, they're the hardest to reach of all. The so-called environmental academicians, the hardest to reach of all. The most programmed, the most in their bubble of all. I have great disdain for them and disappointment in their lack of courage. Again, in the meantime, the biosphere implodes by the day. And here's a dire fact, which should be headlines, but that is almost never covered by any source. In many locations, record high low temperatures, the nighttime lows, are outpacing record daytime high temperatures by over 500%. And this is not considered in any climate modeling. Only the daytime highs are considered. 5 times worse when we look at the escalating nighttime lows. What does that mean? It means it's not cooling off at night. Why not? because heat is not escaping back into the atmosphere. Why not? There's multiple factors, not just this or that, it's multiple factors. We need to consider all those factors. First, greenhouse gases are saturating the atmosphere. These gases include methane and nitrous oxide, and of course CO2 as well, which is absolutely a problem. And if anyone tells you otherwise, that CO2 is not a problem, ask them if they have any understanding whatsoever of ocean acidification, which is killing our seas. Next, climate engineering, aka solar radiation management programs, though these operations deflect some of the daytime heat, they also trap heat from escaping at night. And of course, geoengineering is also destroying the ozone layer, completely disrupting the hydrological cycle, poisoning the entire surface of the planet. I could go on. What's that doing to the biosphere? How is that affecting us? Here's a headline. Billions of dead trees force U.S. fire crews to shift tactics. And let's remember, as I go into these succession of dire frontline environmental headlines, as the biosphere implodes, industrialized civilization must implode. The economy must implode. Military aggression and the law of the jungle will ensue. That's exactly the path we're on. And we're over the precipice already. It's not coming. It's not off on the horizon. It's unfolding now. Remember that order, that sequence. You can't have economic growth perpetually on a finite planet with finite resources, with an out-of-control military-industrial complex, without ending in planetary omnicide. From this report again. Vast stands of dead timber in the western U.S. have forced firefighters to shift tactics, trying to stay out of the shadow of lifeless, unstable trees that could come crashing down with deadly force. About 6.3 billion dead trees are still standing in 11 western states, and that figure is grossly underestimated, as is all dire environmental frontline stories or data. That's what official agencies are tasked with doing. Downplay the direness of the situation. Since 2010, a massive infestation of beetles, continuing from this report from the Associated Press, has been the leading cause of tree mortality in the West and now accounts for about 20% of standing dead trees, the Forest Service said. The rest were killed by drought, disease, fire, or other causes. One more sentence and then I'll elaborate on this. Researchers have long disagreed on whether beetle infestations have made wildfires worse, and this year's ferocious fire season has renewed the debate, with multiple fires burning in forests with beetle-killed trees. Massive, massive lies of omission in this report from, quote, official sources like the Forest Service. Massive lies of omission. No mention of geoengineering, no mention of the toxic bioavailable metals in the rain that are killing the trees from the roots up, making them incapable of defending themselves against the beetles. No mention of the now decimated ozone layer that is frying the trees from above, not just massive UVB, but UVC as well. Total lies of omission, and I know people in Forest Service, I know people in USDA, and they do not have the courage to face this issue because it's a very bad career decision or worse. So they simply toe the line with the lies of omission, deceiving the public that wants to be deceived. Make no mistake about that. The public wants to be deceived, because if they didn't, especially in Northern California where I've lived and have for 10 plus, almost 15 years here, sounded the alarm on what's happening with lab tests, with credible data, and yet we don't have anybody down protesting in front of the Forest Service locations or the USDA locations. Nobody. Not yet. At some point that will come, as people realize everything was true, everything was real, they're in a fight for life, and that their official, quote, experts have completely and utterly and totally betrayed them and betrayed the entire web of life. If we want to wake these people up, we have to, all of us, organize groups to peacefully arm ourselves with data. Data, that's it. Arm yourself with credible data. And go to these agencies and protest until they're willing to look at that data, until they're willing to acknowledge it. And do the same with media, like our completely criminal media in Northern California, the Record Searchlight and KRCR, which are absolutely tools of the power structure, nothing less. We have to have enough individuals that are willing to fight for their lives, fight for their children's lives, get credible data, and go to these locations, and not just here, I mean all over the country, all over the planet, If you have credible data to pass on, you can gain ground in this battle. You can wake people up. You can wake others up around you. But if you rant and rave and point at the sky and repeat every completely outlandish claim that you've ever heard about what's going on without credible facts, you're not going to help the cause. It's that simple. But we have the official experts telling us it's everything in the world causing our forests to die without acknowledging the single greatest causal factor of all, climate engineering. Moving on, CAL FIRE representatives are describing the vegetation as being, quote, explosive. And here's a question. Does this sound like the condition of environment in which there's officially no drought? In California, none? No drought at all? That's what we're officially being told. Again, official agencies lying. That's what they're paid to do. Pacify the population and lie. Tell the population what they want to hear. No drought in a forest that has record low fuel moistures? Again, go to geoengineeringwatch.org and look, geoengineering is fueling firestorms of catastrophe. Look at that new post and find out what you didn't want to know. The official narrative that the drought is over in California is a complete fabricated lie. A lie like many other lies that, again, are crafted to pacify populations while the power structure continues to prepare for the total collapse of industrialized, militarized civilization. A collapse that's already unfolding and that will continue to accelerate. And I'm not addressing a simple economic collapse again. Rather, this is biosphere collapse and Earth's life support systems collapsing with it. That's the bottom line. Back to the billions of dying trees in the western U.S. And again, yes, that's billions, not millions, many billions. Let me backtrack for a moment to a meeting I organized 4 years ago to address the dying trees. In attendance were the staff of a California Congressman Doug LaMalfa, and USDA scientists whom I've known for many years. Representatives from CAL FIRE were there as observers. They were not formally a part of the meeting, and I appreciate the CAL FIRE personnel that I know. I appreciate them greatly. But they need to speak out as well. But at this meeting, with these congressional reps, USDA scientists, some Forest Service people there, staring at a hillside full of dead trees, I challenged them that would they acknowledge that there's massive die-off occurring. And they looked at each other. They looked at the congressional reps and they said, no, we don't see any problem. And I walked away from the circle shaking my head. What else could I do? When people are willing to stand around in a group and cling to the herd think, head in the sand mentality of total denial while the forests are dying around us, where are we now? I was trying to sound the alarm on the dead trees here in this region over 10 years ago. Nobody would listen. Nobody. Some are listening now, but a whole lot more need to, and fast. And when you're at a meeting with the so-called experts and your, quote, congressional representatives from, again, Doug LaMalfa's office, who has done everything they can to deny this issue, so much so that one of Doug LaMalfa's aides went to one of my presentations on climate engineering, and instead of having the backbone to stand up and ask a question in front of the whole audience, she didn't have that much backbone. No, she stood by the door when people were leaving, sheepishly saying, Dane's lying. No courage at all. Total cowardice. And why did she say that? Because her job depended on it. Because Doug LaMalfa's office got a call. And I was told by this individual before she resorted to such incredibly cowardly behavior that they got a call and were told to leave this issue alone. And were they all too willing to do so? Yes. All too willing to just toe the line for the power structure. And that's the whole system we live in. So I was trying to sound the alarm on the dying trees years ago. Now how bad is it? It's up to all of us to wake the population up. Again, credible data, not just pointing at the sky and ranting. And those materials are on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We've made them available at the lowest possible amount to try to get them into circulation. We're just trying to cover our costs so we don't go broke. We can't supply the whole world with materials at our own expense. We can't. I've spent my whole retirement on this adventure, my whole retirement, because it won't mean anything soon. None of our retirements will. For those who think they're going to retire and learn how to golf better, as some of the commercials would suggest we do with our lives, wake up. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. If you want to do something for the common good, do it now or lose your chance. Here's a recent headline from Siberia that our media also won't cover. Siberia ablaze. Raging forest fires engulf 5 Russian regions. We don't hear about that, do we? Siberian cities are cloaked in smoke from raging wildfires whipped up by winds. The blazes are raging in 5 regions. The situation is hampered by extreme temperatures. Again, for all those trying to toe the global cooling narrative, the false global cooling narrative that our power structure wants us to repeat, you're harming the climate engineering cause. More headlines. I'm running out of time fast. Record Amazon fires stun scientists. Sign of sick, degraded forests. Within the fire season, with the fire season still going on, Brazil has seen 208,000 fires. 208,000. We don't hear about that here, do we? How are we to survive when there's no trees on the planet? That's it. Game over. No trees, no people. Very, very simple. Let's add to that equation. Dead oceans, no people. No ozone layer, no people. All of this is converging right now, and we have a population that wants to support a military-industrial complex that wants to build more weapons to do more damage on what's left of Earth's life support systems. How much sense does that make? Makes no sense. We're living in an insane asylum, and that's the actual fact of the matter. Final paragraph from this report on the Amazon forest burn down. Scientists warn of a dangerous synergy. Forest degradation has turned the Amazon from a carbon sink to a carbon source. While globally humanity's carbon emissions are worsening, no mention of methane here, which is the worst of all, of drought and fires, no mention of climate engineering either. Brazil's rapid Amazon development deepens the problem. Researchers warn that mega fires are coming unless trends are reversed. The fate of the Amazon's forest is inextricably bound to the fate of the world. As I just stated, no trees, no people, game over. How are the penguins doing in the coldest parts of the world? Here's a headline that we won't be told by our media. Penguin disaster has only 2 chicks survived. 2 from a colony of 40,000. 2 survived. Do we hear about that? No. Instead, we have our government, with Mr. Trump, the current puppet head of our government, doing this. Federal government, no threatened species listing for walruses. The Trump administration announced on Wednesday it will not list the Pacific walrus as a threatened species based on the diminished Arctic Ocean sea ice, concluding that the marine animals have adapted to the loss of foraging from coastlines. The penguins aren't adapting too well, are they? And neither are the walruses. But let's just pretend it's not real. Let's have some paid experts to say it's all good and fine, and let's all just go back to sleep. Mountains of monumental lies to pacify the population. Continuing from this report, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officials said they can't determine with certainty that the walruses are likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future, which the agency defines as the year 2060. Mathematically speaking, we'll all be gone by 2030. On the current course, we've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years, and the so-called experts from the fish and game, they just can't figure anything out, especially under the threat from being fired from the current administration. Final sentence, beside Pacific walrus, the Fish and Wildlife Service found that 24 other species did not warrant protections under the Endangered Species Act. Let's all just pretend it's not happening. Another headline, a massive hole just opened up in Antarctica's ice and scientists can't explain it. Again, they can't figure it out. The experts can't figure anything out because they're paid not to figure it out. It's up to us, the population. From this report, a massive hole the size of Lake Superior, that's big, has just opened many miles inland from where the ice meets the ocean, and the scientists have little concrete explanation as to why it's there. How about massive methane releases from the seafloor, for one, which they're not disclosing? How many people have even heard of this, besides a few select sources, GeoEngineeringWatch.org being one? Methane, enough methane on this planet, if released, would turn this planet into Venus, and we're heading there fast right now, and that's why the nighttime low temperatures are not going down, because methane is covering the planet like a layer of glass. Heat comes in, can't get out. Enough methane in the Laptev Sea alone in the Arctic, mathematically speaking, 10,000 gigatons. Enough methane to create a Permian-style mass extinction 100 times over. Enough methane there alone to turn this planet into Venus. Climate engineering trying to hide that fact while fueling the fire at the same time and using weather as a weapon. Weather warfare is real. It's now. It's happening in our country. How many examples do we need? How many? Continuing, NASA satellite imagery reveals Antarctic sea ice is breaking up in countless locations. Official sources are not disclosing this in Antarctica or the Arctic. So while the military-industrial complex is gearing up for playing its last and biggest card, World War III, and while the biosphere is imploding all around us, what's mainstream media covering? Trump's infantile IQ challenge with Rex Tillerson. Welcome to the asylum. Again, here's another one along those same lines. Strange Colorado radar images likely caused, this is by the National Weather Service, by thousands of migrating birds or butterflies. Now, these are the large radio frequency bursts that we see from the climate control transmission locations. And we have the National Weather Service telling us, first they said it was birds, now they say it's butterflies. How incredibly absurd can the official narrative be from the National Weather Service? That a whole state, a big radar burst that shows up on radar is massive amounts of trillions of birds or butterflies? Has anybody seen any photographs of trillions of birds or butterflies? And that's what the National Weather Service is telling us officially on the record? Look it up. Here's the headline again. Strange Colorado radar images likely caused by thousands of migrating butterflies. Again, they've said first it was birds, then they said it was butterflies. Absurd. Total absurdity. Now let's go to this headline, as I'm running out of time rapidly. J.P. Morgan Chase issues, quote, emergency bylaws for bank to operate after nuclear attack. From this report, there's an old saying, all wars are bankers' wars. It derives from the reality that money follows rates of return, the flag follows money, and troops follow the flag. That's the order that it's all put together in. It all goes back to money. If J.P. Morgan Chase is implementing emergency bylaws to operate after nuclear attack, which means they're not responsible for anything, they control the money, and that's that. And that's what this report comes down to. Consider this thought. Are those in power now desperate enough to unleash a nuclear holocaust in order to try and trigger a nuclear winter event as a last-ditch attempt to slow the accelerating runaway climate shift of planetary incineration that's pushing the planet toward Venus syndrome? The power structure is fracturing. Each branch knows that the current paradigm is already disintegrating. There will be no limit to their desperation at this point. On the current course, again, without a complete change of direction by our species, no one lives. A final thought and quote from Mr. Twain. Civilization largely consists in hiding human nature. When the barbarian learns to hide his nature, we account him as enlightened. Is the military-industrial complex enlightened? The barbarians that try to hide their true nature under the guise of spreading freedom and democracy? That's a quote from Mr. Twain again. We're not behaving as an enlightened life form, as an intelligent life form. Rather, taken as a whole, the human race has behaved in an unimaginably arrogant, reckless, and suicidal manner. The sand in the hourglass is rapidly running out. So what do? What can each of us do to make a difference at this late hour? What can we do to sound the alarm? To those that are afraid to stand up and speak out, your silence will not save you. Summon your courage and do your individual part in this epic battle to salvage what is yet left of Earth's climate and life support systems. How? How do you do that? There's only one way forward: to awaken the masses, to reach a critical awareness level. And why is this the only way forward? Because this battle cannot be fought without an army of the awakened, an army of individuals in every profession and arena of expertise that realizes they are literally fighting for their lives, for the lives of their children, for what is yet left of Earth's life support systems. And the most important first leap in the right direction is the effort to expose and halt the climate engineering insanity. How? How do we best accomplish that? By sharing credible data from a credible source. Hard-hitting, credible informational materials are available on the homepage of GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Arm yourself with informational materials and wake those around you. Have them do the same. Every single day counts in this battle. Passing on credible data is exponentially more effective than pointing at the sky and ranting, which only puts people on the defensive. We're all engaged in a grand game of chess with everything at stake. We must learn to be effective and efficient and to prioritize. And for those who are afraid of resistance and rejection from their family and their peers, please consider this. We would all do well to remember and to never forget that life at best is a seasonal occupation, and the season is not long. What do you want to be found doing when you take your last breath? To be fully engaged in this epic battle for the greater good, or with your head in the sand, avoiding any resistance from your family or friends who need to wake up? Make your voice heard in this epic battle for the greater good. Every single day counts. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.